Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Love to the grave. It is not uncommon for the ship of love to crash on the rocks of marriage. Married life does not always meet expectations. During falling in love, the world seems in a rosy light, and the beloved man is the limit of dreams. True attitudes are tested over time. Unfortunately, for most couples, the truth comes out too late. And when the matter smells of divorce, it turns out that it is not so easy to get out of codependent relationships. In such cases, people go through a severe crisis. Some don't dare to follow through. Others start a new life. Former lovers have a lot in common: the past, children, jointly acquired property, loans, and other circumstances. Dealing with these issues seriously undermines mental and physical health. Harmonious perception of the breakup by both parties is rare. That's when one thing remains paramount: not to lose your temper and make things worse. Brett Sickett and Vashti Forrest, lovers from Kansas, who tied themselves in marriage on the beach in Belize. The young people planned the perfect life. They moved to Kingman, bought a house, and had 2 children. Each of them had a favorite job and got a professional vocation. Sooner or later, however, any fairy tale ends. Over time, outwardly harmonious relationships ceased to correspond to reality. Spouses quarreled and reconciled, and even tried joint psychotherapy. However, the events that occurred on the night of April 30th, 2011, put an end to their love story. Detectives had to understand what caused such an unexpected denouement. Was it the wife's unstable mental state, or her husband's uncontrollable sense of ownership? One thing was clear: the house fire was the result of an accident, or a brutal murder. Love story. Brett and Vashti met in high school. The girl stood out among her friends and was very pretty. Her boyfriend was an outstanding athlete. They loved each other very much and were always together. In 2004, young people got married, after which they decided to settle in Brett's hometown. Everyone in the neighborhood considered the family Sickett exemplary. The spouses raised 2 sons, 4-year-old Brandon and 2-year-old Bronson. The head of the family worked as a sheriff's deputy and also taught at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. Vashti was building a successful career as a communications representative at Cox Communications. No one who knew them doubted that they had a wonderful union, however. They just didn't really spread the word. The couple definitely had problems. From the moment they met, Brett had controlled Vashti. At first it was a slight pressure, but years later his overbearing character intensified. He was jealous of his wife and sometimes even suspected of cheating. At the same time, Vashti tried to please in everything. She was a kind and cheerful woman who took care of her family. She respected her husband and tried to keep the peace, but in doing so she did not notice how she lost herself in her marriage. Her friends recalled that in recent years she changed a lot. She became thoughtful and uncommunicative. As it turned out later, Sickett limited her contact with loved ones. He didn't like sharing her with anyone, as he repeatedly stated. So Vashti would call and see her nearest and dearest in his absence. Brett also had a big grievance regarding her work. Vashti was a diligent employee and worked hard. She often stayed late in the evenings, which provoked conflicts at home. Brett did not share her desire to socialize and establish herself in her career. He believed that he earned enough to support the family alone. But his spouse thought otherwise. She wanted to be independent and contribute to the family budget. Besides, she loved her job and saw it as an outlet. Attempts at happiness. The man believed that his wife's fatigue after work greatly affected her emotional background. However, it is not known what affected Vashti's mental state to a greater extent: workload and increased responsibility, or endless tension in the family. In the end, the young woman burned out and became depressed. In addition, the pills she had started taking were having a negative impact on her well-being. One day Vashti decided to take a serious look at her health. She was complex about her appearance, or rather her lush forms. According to the results of tests, it turned out that weight gain provoked hormonal disorder. For natural weight loss, the doctor prescribed specialized drugs. However, the proposed treatment did not exclude some side effects, such as fatigue, increased irritability and anxiety. It is likely that the treatment could have exacerbated the depressed state, and, as a consequence, caused serious consequences in the form of negative thoughts of self-harm. Vashti's family later confirmed that she was indeed depressed, but at the same time she tried to fight and live on, began to visit a psychotherapist, and since November 2010, in order to improve her relationship with her husband, she enrolled in family counseling. Final solution. Unfortunately, the list of mutual recriminations was growing day by day. Outside help did not help, the quarrels continued. Perhaps because the woman realized that the matter was heading for divorce, her depression worsened. It was difficult to see the collapse of a familiar way of life. She tried to be more out of the house, went out alone or with friends. She did everything to be alone with her husband less often. All in all, the decision to divorce was hard for her, but it was the best option for everyone. A few days before the tragedy, she saw a lawyer and signed the fateful papers. Vashti wanted to get custody of the children, but she was not against communication between the children and their father, but on one condition: the children would see their father in her presence. The fact is that Brett not only treated her harshly, but also the children. Despite their small age, he punished them for provinces and did not allow them to show weakness. The father believed that in this way he would raise real men, but at the same time clearly overreacted. On this ground in the family often happened quarrels. Kathleen Forrest, Vashti's sister, said that sometime before the decision to divorce, Vashti confessed a lot of things. She talked about her husband's behavior and the intolerability of the marriage, about her resentment and her desire to make things right, which never came to fruition. After listening to her, Kathleen concluded that Brett had all the characteristics of a narcissist and abuser. She had suspected this before, but after a frank conversation with her sister, she became convinced. A short time later, Vashti was gone. Before her death, she handed her husband a divorce petition. Fire. On April 30, 2011, at 3:57 a.m., emergency services received a call. The caller identified himself as 35-year-old Brett Sickett and reported the incident. His wife, 34-year-old Vashti Sickett, set the house on fire and then took her own life. The man also added that there were children inside, but he managed to save them. He also tried to carry his spouse out. However, the entire building was engulfed in flames and he was unable to help her. The dispatcher took the call, urged him not to leave the children alone, and not to enter the burning house again. When emergency services arrived on the scene, there was no one to rescue. After putting out the fire, rescuers went inside. On the second floor in one of the bedrooms on the bed was a charred corpse. The woman was lying on her left side as if sleeping. Her arms and legs were bent. Brett's version. After he had recovered a little from the shock, he was talked to by fellow police officers. After he calmed down, he explained more about what had happened. According to him, at around 3 a.m. his wife called him and said that if he wanted the boys he should go upstairs and get them. He was sleeping downstairs on the couch that time. Brett did as Vashti asked. He figured she wasn't feeling well and the boys in the next room were bothering her. Going up to the second floor, he peeked in on the children who were sleeping peacefully. At the same instant he smelled the odor of burning, and further shots followed. With all his legs, the man rushed towards the noise to his wife's room. When he opened the door, he saw the bed on fire, and his wife immovable on it. As he got closer, he realized what had happened. Everything around was splattered with blood, and the woman showed no signs of life. The fire was burning with unimaginable intensity. Brett held her against him, trying to lift her up, but because of the scalding flames he couldn't do so. Then he made the decision to rescue the children, and then go back for Vashti. He grabbed the sleepy children and carried them outside. He then put them in his car and called emergency services. While making the call, he did try to go inside the burning house. Brett covered his face with a wet napkin, but he couldn't get very far. The entire room was filled with smoke. He didn't recognize his surroundings and moved almost by feel. Somehow or other, the fire was stronger and forced him to surrender. The head of the family looked confused. When asked by the police what he thought had caused the fire, he explained the following. Vashti had been in an unstable emotional state lately, causing her to have bad thoughts on more than one occasion. She may not have been able to cope with them and put the plan into action. Brett also explained that before going to bed, they discussed the upcoming divorce with his wife. Finally, they decided on the division of property and child rearing. In fact, it was their last night together. It is possible that the woman was so upset that she decided to die. There was one thing I didn't understand. Why would she start a fire and endanger the children? Even if she did take care of them and asked her husband to take the boys, why destroy the house? At that point, there were no answers to these questions. What had happened did not add up to a coherent picture. The investigators had a difficult task ahead of them. They had to establish whether in fact a loving wife and mother of 2 children voluntarily left her life, or she was helped in this. Unconcealed suspicions. When Vashti's relatives learned of the tragedy, they contacted law enforcement officials. They demanded that the investigation be treated with special attention and that the events be viewed from the perspective of murder. The woman's relatives assured that she could not have committed arson and then taken her own life. Despite her difficult family situation and divorce proceedings, she loved life and her children. Undoubtedly, Vashti was going through a difficult time. Her sanity was shaken, but not to that extent. Moreover, the Forests were convinced that a mother like her would never have risked the children's lives and made them homeless. Vashti was a loving and caring mother. Every day she would get up at 4 a.m. to prepare a fresh and natural breakfast. She was attentive to everything, and had a big and pure heart that knew how to be compassionate. For an example, Kathleen recalled an incident in her life. One day her sister learned that a kindergarten boy had been diagnosed with cancer. The child could have been saved, but his family needed financial help. Vashti came to the rescue with a fundraiser. She began baking pancakes, which were in particular demand. After each trade, Vashti gave the proceeds to the boy's family. It was unlikely that such a woman would leave her children to fend for themselves. In addition, she made big plans for the future. Together with her sister, she planned a vacation in Mexico, made repairs to the house, and every evening after work hurried to her sons. After a visit to the doctor, Vashti Sikhet thoroughly took care of herself. She started exercising, eating right, and began to lose weight. Finally, she was starting to like herself in the mirror. Just a week before this happened, she had updated her closet. All indications were that the deceased was determined to move on. The brother and sister asked detectives to take a closer look at Brett's personality and told them what they knew. Although Kathleen, Richard, and Vashti lived in different states, they were close to each other and tried to keep in touch. The family was aware of the problems their sister was facing and were not going to keep quiet. However, they were worried that because of Sikhet's position, the local police might have turned a blind eye to what had happened. Therefore, they revealed that their sister had complained about threats from her spouse more than once recently. He was against the divorce and did not want to let Vashti go. The man said that he would do something to her, and nothing would happen to him for it. He reasoned that given his police skills, he'd make it look like an accident, and they'd believe him. Evidence. However, the investigators did not rush to conclusions and began to study the available evidence, and there was plenty of it in the case. First, during the examination of the scene, criminalists managed to find a lot of interesting things. Near the hearth of the fire was a canister of gasoline, indicating that the arson was, in fact, premeditated. Secondly, the incongruous position of the gun used to shoot the deceased. It was under her body, muzzle down. This raised a lot of questions. David Folletti, senior special agent in charge of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, stated, "If Vashti shot herself lying down, the gun would have fallen to the floor. If she was sitting up and shot herself, the gun should have remained on her right side. The position in which it was found just didn't make sense." Even more disturbing was the trajectory of the bullet. However, it took time for the experts to get to the bottom of it all. Fourthly, when examining the contents of the lady's purse, a notebook was found. One of the pages contained a farewell message. Vashti wrote that she couldn't fight anymore. For that reason, she had to say goodbye to her husband and sons. She bequeathed to Brett to take care of the children. She asked the boys to be strong and forgive her. Vashti promised to watch over everyone from heaven. Despite the obviousness of what had happened, there were many inconsistencies in the case. It was as if someone was trying to make it look like wishful thinking. Next, the authorities investigated the couple's life and interviewed the people around them. Family opinion. The Forrest family said that just a short time ago, Vashti served her husband with divorce papers, and just a couple days later, she died. They knew that Brett was pressuring her, but no one believed he could follow through. Everyone thought the dissolution of the marriage would be a protracted process at the very least. Vashti was afraid her husband would take the children away from her, so she put up with it for years. Everyone described him as uncommunicative and secretive. He had almost no friends, and colleagues at work considered Brett arrogant. He was the complete opposite of his wife. Eventually, her stamina reached its limit, and she made the decision to separate. Everyone knew what the man's reaction was. He was angry and canceled a planned dinner with friends. In response, Seekett stated that he would do anything to prevent his wife from seeing the children. Undoubtedly, such a prospect was frightening. So that same day, Vashti took the boys and spent the night at a friend's house. In this way, she wanted to give her husband time to step back and get used to the new realities. Vashti hoped he would pack up his things and leave home. But instead, he stayed. From what he said, he needed time to find a new place to live. Brett's speech touched Vashti's good heart. She hoped she could resolve the disagreement in a civilized manner, so she returned home the next day, full of hope that the dispute would be resolved and the divorce would be amicable. In principle, Brett himself did not hide it. He initially admitted that his spouse was worried about child custody. As a loving father, he did not want to part with his sons and was going to fight. However, allegedly, on that ill-fated night, he and his wife reached an agreement. Unfortunately, on April 29th, the deceased did not communicate with anyone, and what was going on at their home is unknown. Witnesses. The testimony of a neighbor of the family shed light on the situation in the house. The witness said that on the night of April 30th, she was suffering from insomnia. At 3:15 a.m., the silence outside the window was broken by the sound of clapping. The words of the eyewitness made one wonder. It was unclear why Brett had called emergency services 42 minutes later. Brett was a police officer and knew full well that delay could have tragic consequences. In addition, the experts listened to his call again. The man's voice seemed reserved and cold. It gave the impression that he did not care. Then the investigators talked to the psychotherapist, whom the couple visited. The specialist said that Vashti was concerned about her husband's reaction and the threats she was receiving. She shared that during one of the arguments, her husband confessed that he dreamed of killing her. This statement frightened Vashti, but she did not believe that he was capable of such a thing. The therapist herself characterized Brett as a narcissist with latent psychopathic tendencies. Autopsy. By this time, the autopsy results on the deceased were in. Pathologists reported no traces of soot or smoke in the lungs, indicating that the woman died before the fire. Cause of death appears to be a gunshot wound to the head. But the strange thing was, it wasn't the only one. Pathologists found several other wounds to the chest and thighs, which is unusual for a man who voluntarily left his life. The toxicology report found that Vashti was not under the influence of any substances at the time of death. Suspect. Brett was eventually called in for questioning. He was extremely unhappy and did not understand why he was suspected. In the process, he explained that he loved his wife very much and was experiencing the sorrow of loss. He was left alone with 2 children and was mentally shattered. The officers then bluntly asked the co-worker if he was involved in the death of his spouse, to which Seekett replied that if he had wanted to kill her, he would have thought of something better. However, he was countered that he was well aware of how well fire destroys all evidence. "I would never burn our house down, much less put my children in a situation like that." Brett justified himself. About the threats to his wife, the suspect explained that it was a farce. Thus, he just wanted to hurt her feelings and make her worry. In turn, he insisted that he would never touch his beloved. When asked what provoked Vashti to start a fire in the house, he was evasive. Allegedly, she hated the place. Brett made it sound good, but no one believed him. The first time he explained that he had run into his wife's room and tried to help. However, there was no evidence to support this. At that time, his appearance spoke to the contrary. There were no bloodstains, soot, or traces of fire on his clothes or body. In fact, he was in the very epicenter of the fire, and yet he remained unharmed. That's impossible. So he didn't go into the burning room and lied to make his wife look bad. Goodbye. A few days after Vashti's death, her funeral was held. The memorial service was held in front of the burned house. At the ceremony, gathered relatives and familiar people did not bypass the tragedy, and not indifferent citizens. All mourned the untimely passing of a woman and mother of 2 children. Brandon and Bronson were informed that the mother went to heaven. The little ones asked God to bring her back. Those who came spoke well of Vashti, remembering her character. When the rumors spread through the town, everyone found it hard to believe that she could leave her babies to be raised by a tyrant husband. The investigation into the case moved quickly. The pants Brett was wearing the night of the fire were sent for examination. It showed gasoline droplets on them. That was evidence against him. The laptop that miraculously survived was examined. It turned out that before the fire, several requests had been made from it on how to get rid of the evidence. In addition, a close examination of the scene revealed several traces of fire. So he acted with certainty. The handwriting examination of Vashti's suicide note revealed that the deceased's handwriting was forged. The trajectory of the bullet was examined in detail. The forensics revealed that the shot was fired from a distance. Vashti would have needed an unrealistic arm extension and bend to make the shot herself. Trial. Brett Sickett was eventually arrested on May 14, 2011. He was charged with murdering his wife, arson, and child endangerment. 2 years later, the trial began. The prosecution insisted on the defendant's guilt and presented all the available evidence in the case. They were so undeniable and sufficient that those present in the courtroom had no doubts about his involvement. As experts were invited specialists in handwriting, ballistics. Forensic experts and a psychotherapist also testified. Connie Suderman, a family counselor, admitted that hours after his wife's death, Brett called her. He admitted that he was responsible for her death. During the hearing, the defendant explained that his words were being misinterpreted. For 19 years I was the one who protected her, but in the end pushed her to what I was protecting her from. So I believe Vashti's death is on my conscience, he explained. Brett expressed that in making the decision to pass away, their last conversation was fatal. After a number of forensic tests, it was discovered that the farewell note was forged by none other than the deceased's spouse. According to the prosecution, on the morning of April 29th, Brett had no intention of leaving home. But not for lack of another place to live, but for another reason. He had something terrible in mind. On the night of April 30th, when everyone was asleep, Brett took a .44 caliber Magnum pistol. He went into his wife's bedroom and shot her several times. Then he set the fire. Next, he carried the children out and contacted emergency services. The prosecutor cited a sense of property and a desire for revenge as the motive for such a brutal crime. The jury had 5 hours to reach a verdict. In the end, 37-year-old Brett Sickett was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with parole after 25 years for murder, 5 years in prison for arson, and 1 year for endangering the lives of his sons. The defendant disagreed with the sentence. He was so angry that he dared to tell the jury and the judge that they were going to hell. Life after. Time later, the defendant appealed. However, the verdict remained unchanged. After numerous trials, Vashti and Brett's children were given to the care of Kathleen Forrest. The fact is that there was a fierce struggle between the two families for the upbringing of the children. In the end, the court decision sided with the Vashti family. Currently, the convict is in a correctional facility located outside of Kansas. His transfer is due to the fact that former law enforcement officers do not serve time with criminals they may have put away. This is how the Sickett family's story ended tragically. A beautiful beginning and a monstrous ending. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to my channel. There are many shocking stories ahead of you.